They called it the 9 nights. No one was allowed to sleep. Not the children, not the elders, not even the animals. The village chief said dreams were a trapdoor to hell, and that if anyone drifted into them, demons would crawl through. So they watched each other. Every blink was dangerous. Every yawn was punished. Those who closed their eyes were chained to wooden poles in the square, heads forced up to the burning torches above them. Mothers slapped their babies awake. Husbands poured buckets of cold water over wives. By the third night, people started shaking. On the fifth, they began seeing things. The whispers came first, soft voices in the dark, speaking in tongues no one recognized. By the seventh, they were no longer whispers, but screams. Neighbors accused each other of hiding sleep. Friends turned into enemies. And when the ninth night came, no one could tell if the shadows were real. They only knew one thing. If anyone closed their eyes now, they might never wake up as themselves again. The order came without warning. One afternoon, a bell rang from the old stone tower, and the elders gathered the villagers in the square. The chief stood in the center, his voice low but sharp. "The dream gates are opening," he said. "We have 9 nights before the fires of the pit rise. If you sleep, you will burn, and you will take us all with you." No one laughed. They had heard whispers of this prophecy before, but only as a children's tale to keep them alert during harvest season. Now, it was spoken as law. Wooden stakes were hammered into the ground at the edge of the square. Ropes and iron chains were laid in piles beside them. The message was clear. If you could not resist the pull of dreams, others would restrain you until the danger passed. This was not cruelty, they were told. It was salvation. Anyone who resisted the decree was an enemy of the village. The first night passed in tense silence. People huddled in groups, speaking in fragments, their eyes darting at the slightest head droop. They walked in circles, slapped each other's cheeks, forced bitter herbs between their teeth to sting the mouth awake. Children were kept upright on parents' laps, shaken at the first sign of drowsiness. Even the animals, goats, dogs, chickens, were herded together and kept in constant motion. The belief being that if one creature slept, the infection of dreams would spread. By the second night, the toll began to show. Eyes were red and glassy, skin twitched, speech slowed. A young man named Oren collapsed beside the well. His sister caught him before he hit the ground, but the crowd surged forward. They dragged him to a stake, bound his arms, and propped his head back toward the torchlight. His screams carried until dawn. By morning, his voice was gone. The elders roamed like guards, checking houses, peering through windows. No shutters were allowed closed. Every home was to be watched. They patrolled the square, chanting under their breath. Speaking prayers meant to keep the dream spirits at bay. But some swore they could already see them. Dark, wavering shapes hovering in the corners of their vision, just out of reach. On the third day, a boy of no more than 8 began shouting that the ground was moving beneath him. He clawed at the dirt, insisting something below was calling his name. His mother tried to calm him, but he bit her arm and ran. The others chased him, not because they feared for his safety, but because they feared what he might bring back if he fell asleep. By the fourth night, they began burning bundles of pungent herbs at every corner, the smoke stinging eyes and throats, forcing them to stay awake through pain. The elders spoke of the sleeper's rot, an invisible sickness that would seep into their bones if they let their minds drift. They described in chilling detail how the first symptom was forgetting one's own name, then forgetting the faces of family, until the sleeper returned as something else entirely. In one house, an elderly woman named Mayra was found rocking back and forth, whispering to a child no one else could see. When questioned, she claimed the child had been knocking on her door all night, asking to be let in from the cold. They dragged her outside, tied her to a stake, and forced her to stare at the flames until sunrise. By now, the decree was no longer a rule. It was a religion. The village's survival depended on it, or so they were told. And with every passing hour, the line between faith and fear thinned, until no one could remember which came first. By the fifth night, the village no longer resembled itself. Familiar faces twisted into masks of suspicion. People no longer walked together. They stalked each other. Every movement was watched. Every pause in speech was a sign of weakness. To stop talking for too long meant your mind might be drifting toward dreams. In the tavern, once the heart of laughter and trade, a fight broke out over a man who had leaned against the wall with his eyes closed for a breath too long. His own brother struck him with a stool, shouting that he was inviting the pit into their house. Blood spilled across the floorboards, but no one stepped in to help. They only stared, their heads jerking in unison toward the man's eyelids, checking if they would twitch open again. The elders began introducing rituals to keep the village pure. On the sixth morning, they gathered everyone at the square for the test of vigilance. One by one, each villager was ordered to stand before the council with eyes wide, staring into the burning torches without blinking for as long as they could endure. Those who faltered were branded with ash on their foreheads, a mark of danger. These people were assigned watchers, neighbors who would never leave their side, whose only task was to keep them from slipping into unconsciousness. On the same day, another ritual was revived from old superstition, the waking draught. Each person was forced to drink a thick, bitter liquid brewed from crushed beetle shells and the bark of the night vine plant. It burned the throat and made the stomach churn violently, the pain keeping them alert for hours. Some vomited immediately, but the elders saw that as proof the draught was working, purging the dream spirit from the body. The hallucinations grew worse. It started with whispers, then shadow shapes. Now people were hearing footsteps behind them, feeling hands on their shoulders when no one was there. A woman named Della claimed she saw her dead husband standing in the doorway of her home, beckoning her to come inside. She ran toward him and collapsed before crossing the threshold. Her eyes rolled back, and she muttered something no one understood. The watchers carried her away, but she was never seen again. Rumors spread about those who disappeared. Some said the elders took them to the old mill and burned them alive, their ashes scattered at the edge of the woods to keep the dream spirits from reassembling. Others claimed they were locked in the root cellar beneath the meeting hall, forced to sit in the dark until the 9 nights ended. No one dared to ask the elders directly. By the 7th night, the air was filled with the sound of chanting and the sharp crack of wooden poles as they were struck against the ground, an ancient rhythm meant to keep hearts racing. Sleep was the enemy. Stillness was betrayal. Parents held their children by the wrists and swung their arms like pendulums, desperate to keep them moving. The dreams began leaking through even while awake. Faces melted into one another mid-conversation. Words lost their meaning, replaced by strange, looping phrases. A young girl named Rin sat by the well repeating, "The gates are teeth, the gates are teeth," until her voice was raw. She swore she could see them. Massive jaws at the horizon, waiting to swallow the village whole the moment someone fell asleep. One man, desperate and trembling, begged the elders to let him leave the village, to find a place where the curse would not follow. The chief's answer was simple. The gates are everywhere. You cannot outrun the pit. The man tried anyway. They found his body at dawn, hanging from the bell tower, eyes open so wide the whites had cracked. Others began tying their own eyelids open with thin leather straps, terrified that even a blink would be their undoing. Some carved symbols into their own skin, marks they believed would confuse the dream spirits if they came. But the more they fought to stay awake, the more reality bent around them. The line between waking and dreaming was gone. No one could say for sure if the things they saw were real anymore. But the elders insisted they hold on. 2 more nights and the danger would pass. 2 more nights without sleep, and the gates would close. No one questioned them aloud. But in the dark corners of the square, people whispered a different fear, that the elders had no intention of letting anyone sleep again. By the 8th night, there was no longer a village, only a pit of hollow-eyed bodies clinging to motion. Every hour was stretched thin, like skin over bone. People swayed where they stood. Words came out as grunts. Some had forgotten how to speak entirely, and yet the elders demanded more. The morning began with the procession of wakefulness. Every man, woman, and child was dragged into the square and made to march in a slow circle for hours. Drums pounded from the center, a relentless heartbeat that refused to let them fall out of rhythm. The sound vibrated in their skulls, each strike a reminder that time was passing, but rest would never come. If anyone stumbled, they were yanked upright by the nearest neighbor and forced to keep moving. Those who collapsed twice were taken to the posts of cleansing. The posts stood on the east side of the square, directly under the rising sun. The condemned were tied facing the horizon, the glare burning into their eyes. By midday, skin blistered, lips cracked, and some fainted on their feet. This, the elders said, was purification, burning the sleep from the flesh. Mothers begged for their children's release, but the elders only reminded them that mercy was the language of the pit. Even under the punishing glare, heads began to nod. It was then that the elders brought out the fire cages, woven of iron strips. Each was just big enough to trap a person in a crouch. Inside, small coals smoldered, filling the air with heat so intense that the trapped gasped for breath. The smell of scorched hair drifted through the square. "Better to burn a little now than burn forever in the pit," the chief announced. Few argued. The Everwake, the most fanatical believers, were everywhere. They painted their faces in soot, their eyes ringed in black. They moved in trios, whispering in unison, their voices weaving strange, hypnotic chants. If they caught anyone leaning against a wall or rubbing their eyes, they would drag them to the center of the square and shout questions in their face. "Where were you just now? Who spoke to you? What did they promise you?" Wrong answers, or no answer at all, meant beatings, sometimes to the point of unconsciousness. Not all violence was public. A woman named Thera was found in her home with her eyelids cut away, her husband swearing she had been halfway gone when he did it. The elders called it a necessary sacrifice. The Everwake called it an act of love. That afternoon, the execution of silence took place. A man named Jarek was accused of dream speaking, uttering words from the pit while awake. He was bound to a chair in the center of the square, his mouth forced open with a metal brace. The elders poured boiling water over his tongue, claiming to cleanse the gate between his mind and the dream world. His screams rattled the windows of every house, and when it was over, he could make no sound at all. Strange signs multiplied. Dogs refused to enter certain parts of the square, growling at invisible shapes. Chickens pecked at the empty air until their beaks bled. And sometimes in the spaces between drum beats, you could hear it. A low, distant hum, like the sound of a great door slowly opening. People began to hear it in their own skulls, like a vibration deep behind the eyes. Then came the shared vision. It happened just after midnight. A scream tore through the square, and within moments, dozens of voices joined it. Men and women clawed at their faces, swearing they saw the same thing. A colossal shadow looming over the village, its hands made of writhing bodies, its face a single lidless eye. It spoke without sound, and its breath smelled of earth freshly turned. When the vision passed, some swore it had leaned down to choose who would not see the dawn. The Everwake called it proof the gates were opening. The resistance called it proof the elders had poisoned the air with hallucinogens to keep control. Neither side could explain why everyone described the same exact image. That night, the Everwake staged the hunt for sleep. Moving in groups of 3, they broke into homes, accusing entire families of drifting too close to dreams. They tore apart furniture, smashed jars of water, cut open pillows to scatter feathers into the streets. In one house, they found a girl curled up under a table, her eyes shut. When she didn't respond to shouts, they dragged her into the square. She never woke again, though her body shuddered for hours. The elders praised the hunt, calling it a holy act. But not everyone believed anymore. Quietly, behind locked doors, a handful of villagers began meeting in secret, whispering that the gates were not real, that the danger was invented. They spoke of old records hidden in the meeting hall, documents that suggested the 9 nights had happened before, centuries ago, and that each time it had ended not with safety, but with fire. They speculated that the fire was not a cleansing, but a silencing. One night, the resistance succeeded in stealing one of these records. By candlelight, they read the brittle pages, learning that in each past 9 nights, the population of the village had been halved, not by sleep, but by executions carried out in secret on the 9th night. And each time, the survivors were told the dead had crossed over in their dreams. The resistance was small, 7 people at most, but they shared one goal: to make it to the 9th night alive and asleep, to prove the elders wrong. They passed coded messages in scraps of cloth, instructing each other when to meet, where the guards were weakest, and which houses were safe for hiding. On the edge of the square, Soren, the man who claimed to see people vanish, sat with his back against a wall, muttering to himself. "It's not the dreams that kill us," he said to anyone who would listen. "It's what's already here, waiting." And above them all in the bell tower, the chief stood watch, unmoving, his eyes never closing, not even to blink. The 9th night arrived like a held breath. No drums, no marching, only the sound of bare feet shifting in the dirt. The elders stood in a line across the square, torches in hand, their faces pale in the flickering light. The Everwake moved among the villagers in silence now. No chants, no threats, just cold eyes watching for the smallest sign of surrender. The resistance had agreed. This was the night they would act. If even one of them could fall asleep and wake again, the lie would crack. But their plan was fragile. Any wrong move, any whisper at the wrong moment, and they would be dragged to the post before dawn. The air was heavier than it had been on any other night. People complained of a ringing in their ears, of their vision bending at the edges. Some said the hum from the night before was louder now, a constant presence in their skulls. Others swore they could feel the ground beneath them breathing. Shortly after midnight, the chief announced the last watch. Every villager would be paired with another, and neither was allowed to leave the other's sight until sunrise. It was the perfect trap. The resistance could not move without exposing themselves. Still they tried. In the shadows behind the mill, 2 members of the resistance, Lyra and Oren, sat pressed against the wall, a small vial clutched between them. Inside was a handful of ground poppy seeds, stolen from an old healer's pouch. Enough to force sleep if taken all at once. Their hands shook as they prepared to drink, but before they could, a shadow fell over them. Soren was there. His eyes were wild. "Don't," he whispered. "You don't know what's waiting." Lyra's lips were already stained with the mixture when the first scream came. It came from the far side of the square, high and sharp, cutting through the heavy air. People turned just in time to see a boy drop to his knees, clutching his chest. His eyes rolled back, and then, impossibly, he rose again, but not as himself. His movements were jerky, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. When he opened his mouth, a voice not his own spoke. "The gates are open." Panic rippled through the square. The Everwake surged forward, tackling the boy and binding his hands. The elders shouted for calm, but the damage was done. People were screaming now, pointing at the corners of the square, swearing they saw figures moving in the torchlight. Some fled into the alleys. Others fell to the ground, covering their heads. In the chaos, Lyra and Oren disappeared. No one saw where they went, only that the vial of poppy seeds lay shattered on the ground. The bells in the tower began to ring, slow and deliberate. Each toll echoed in the chest like a warning. And as the 9th night deepened, no one was certain anymore whether the danger came from the dreams or from those still awake. The square was no longer a gathering place. It was a battlefield. The Everwake hunted anyone who ran. The elders barked orders no one seemed to follow. Somewhere in the distance, glass shattered, and flames began licking at the side of a thatched roof. The first fire had started. Soren moved through the chaos like a shadow, his voice cutting through the noise. He found 3 members of the resistance huddled in an alley. "The chief's not watching the gates," he said. "He's guarding the tower." His meaning was clear. Whatever truth was left, it was up there. They ran. Every step felt heavier than the last. Behind them, the fire spread, turning night into a flickering orange dawn. As they passed the square, they saw the Everwake forcing people into circles, making them chant until their voices cracked. One man broke from the line, sprinting toward the shadows. He didn't make it 2 steps before a torch caught his back. When they reached the tower's base, the door was barred. Oren slammed his shoulder into it until the wood cracked and splintered. The stairs spiraled upward into darkness. With every step, the sound of the bells grew louder, more distorted, until it was no longer ringing, but something like a voice. Low, wet, and speaking in a language none of them knew. Halfway up, Lyra glanced out one of the narrow windows and froze. Beyond the rooftops, something vast shifted, a black curve like the edge of a giant's shoulder. It moved between the stars, swallowing them whole. At the top, the chief stood alone beside the bell, his face slack, his eyes two pale stones. In his hands was a leather-bound book, old enough that its spine had nearly dissolved. "We've kept them out for 8 nights," he said without turning. "On the 9th, the door must open." Lyra stepped forward. "There's nothing out there. You've been lying to us." The chief finally turned. His mouth was smiling, but his eyes were wet. "You think the dreams are the danger?" he asked. "The danger is being awake when they come through." He opened the book and held it out. The pages were filled with names, hundreds of them, crossed out in thick black ink. These are the ones who stayed awake too long, the ones the gates wouldn't take. Below them, screams rose as the fire reached the square. The air seemed to tremble, the hum now a roar. Soren swore he saw that same black curve beyond the rooftops, only now it had an eye. It was looking at them. The chief reached for the rope, ready to strike the final bell. Lyra lunged, grabbing his arm. The leather book fell, pages scattering into the wind. Oren caught one, reading only 3 words before it was torn from his hand. "Dreams are passage." The chief wrenched free and pulled the rope. The bell rang once, deep enough to shake the tower. And then the sound stopped. Not because the bell was still, but because something else was answering. No one could say if what came through the gates was real or born of sleepless minds. Some swore they saw it, a shape vast enough to blot out the horizon, moving as if the world itself bent around it. Others claimed they saw nothing at all, only the sudden, terrible stillness that fell after the bell's echo died. The fire consumed the square first. It leapt from roof to roof, devouring the homes that had stood for generations. The ever-wake didn't flee. They stood in the flames with their arms raised, chanting until their voices were swallowed by the crackling. The elders vanished into the smoke, one by one, as if they had never been there. When dawn came, there was no village, only blackened earth, and a silence so deep it felt like a weight on the chest. Soren, burned and coughing, wandered the ruins until he found Lyra. She was lying in the ash, eyes closed. For a moment, he thought she was gone, but then her lips moved. "I dreamed," she whispered, "and it was nothing like they said." In the days that followed, survivors drifted away from the ruins, carrying nothing but the clothes on their backs. They spoke little of what had happened. When asked, they only said the same thing. "It's safer to stay awake." Yet more than one was found later, curled up in sleep, a faint smile on their face, as if the dreams had called them back. Months later, travelers passing through the burned clearing reported strange things. The air there was unnaturally warm, and at night they claimed to hear bells ringing from nowhere. Some said they saw faint shapes moving at the edges of the clearing, figures that froze when looked at directly. And sometimes they swore the ground itself seemed to breathe. In another village far to the north, a bell rang one afternoon. The elders gathered the people in the square. The chief stepped forward, his voice low but sharp. "The dream gates are opening," he said. "We have 9 nights before the fires of the pit rise." No one laughed.